Hey, what's up, guys? It's Eddie's one half of the Horror Highway. I'll try to keep this intro short. I just want to let you guys know that I'm using this list. It should be linked in the description. That gets posted on 4chan Creepypasta threads, showing us original 4chan Creepypastas. So that's what I'm using. Yeah. Lunch break. It was time for Daniel to head back to the bookshop. It had become the standard part of his routine to visit a nearby bookshop during lunch hour, after a shift at the call center. It helped keep his mind active and interested when the monotony of work was starting to drag on him. It usually took about 3 minutes or so of walking before he would make it into the bookshop. Then, it'd be a good half hour of browsing the shelves before making a purchase or simply sneaking off back to work. He'd especially enjoy the time spent there since he needed to charge his phone and the shop had an abundance of unused outlets. But for today, Daniel was surprised to see that the shop was closed for today. According to the sign on the window, renovations were being done that would last for a week. So if Daniel wanted a good break from work, he'd have to find a different place. Searching up on his phone to find any bookshops nearby with the last of his battery, Daniel just about got the directions for a different place. It was called the Book Bag, and the entrance to the place seemed relatively presentable. Well, presentable enough, as you'd expect from a second-hand bookshop. He knew that in order to find it, he'd look out for a long table that displayed an assortment of books, a supposed taste of what was to be expected. There wasn't any reviews of the place, so he presumed it to be a new place. If there was any place closer, he would have gone with an alternative, with more reviews, but for now, this place would have to do. So with a general sense of where to go, Daniel went off on his way to the book bag. Eventually he found it, or a similar place to it. The place that held the books out on display wasn't there anymore. 4 little clean marks on the floor, right next to the window, indicated that it had been moved earlier in the day. It still held out a sign extending out from the top of the shop, denoting it as the book bag. Just before he would open the door and let himself in though, he looked back towards the marks on the floor. It looked like as the table was further away from the window than he initially realized. He opened the door to the shop and thought nothing of it. Inside, he was almost disappointed to see the size of the place, until he noticed the stairs leading upwards. The width of the place reminded him of a disabled toilet's room, but what it lacked in horizontal space more than made up for it with verticality. With every single wall he saw, each of them were lined with shelves of books. What couldn't be placed on a shelf was placed into plastic boxes that collected dirt, just as much as they collected aged books. To his right, he noticed the cashier was minding his own business, reading the local newspaper. He was within a small room with walls to either side of him, hiding everything but the person inside, and rays of sunlight coming from the right of the room. As soon as the employee noticed that a customer had arrived, he slid the paper down to his side and greeted the man. "It hasn't been long since we had a new guy. Business must be booming, I suppose." While his face made a valiant attempt at showcasing a friendly exterior, his voice betrayed a sense of disinterest, or something of that nature to Daniel. He wasn't quite sure what the tone was, but it was definitely not a friendly one. The employee didn't seem all that friendly either. He wore a casual set of clothes that just about barely fit him, and he possessed a set of gaunt eyes that only seemed to get blacker and blacker. The more he looked into them, his brownish hair was rather unkempt and greasy, with unclean fingernails that grew into talons. Peering past the employee, Daniel took note of the fact that there wasn't much space for the employee at all, just enough room for a chair and some food. "Can I help you with anything, sir?" The employee spoke again, drawing Daniel back into reality. "That's alright, I'll just..." He paused when he realized that he had a dead phone in his jacket pocket. While he didn't plan on being here for any longer than necessary, he thought it wise to at least see if he can get a charge. Actually, do you have an electrical outlet? For my phone, I mean." I can't remember. You'll just have to look further upstairs. That's where we get the new stuff in." Hearing that from the employee made Daniel realize that a lot of books around him were pretty old. Peering in close made him realize that a lot of the stuff here were collector's items, rare copies of books with a salary he could only dream of having on his shelf. He found himself giddy as he moved upstairs, having come to a realization that he had just hit the jackpot. The next floor upstairs was a surprising one for him, as the atmosphere grew to be much more cozy than downstairs. A large open window shone in sunlight, along with a fan light in the center of the ceiling for a cool breeze. Now that there wasn't a mini room taking up space, there was a sofa for Daniel to sit on and to read a book. It almost felt like a library to him, with how quiet and out of the way it was. While he obviously couldn't stay here for long, he would be able to sneak some reading into books that he had interest in. It wasn't as if he was going to be shouted at from an employee for doing so, since the seemingly single employee was stuck downstairs. His fingers drifted through the spines of the books as he noted the editions. As a step below from the priceless book copies, these were the first editions for a variety of books. Everything was labeled A through Z in terms of authors, with no regards to genre. He found himself looking through a certain section of Stephen King. Just about every novel, novella, and short story collection that belonged to him was in here. Everything he could think of was on the shelf that was close to the floor, onto the left wall. Even the ones that didn't seem to be in print anymore, such as Richard Bachman's Rage or the original edition of The Stand, were included. But Daniel saw something else that really puzzled him. A book by Stephen King entitled Ring of Fire. He had never heard of this book before. He didn't recognize the publisher logo on the spine of the book either, and it certainly seemed to be a rather old copy, at least in terms of presentation. He checked for a blurb on the back, and then within the cover, the plot synopsis reminded him of Firestarter, except that instead of a little girl, it was a police trooper, and instead of the powers coming from government experimentation, it was a natural gift blessed by God. The story seemed to be about a trooper grappling with his innate desires to hurt people instead of helping. It seemed to be a relatively interesting book, but it was one that Daniel could scarcely believe. He took a quick look at the price of the book, which was jotted down on the first paper page on the top right corner. 10 euros. It wasn't just a book he'd never heard of, it was a cheap one too. He held the book on his side and stood up from where he was. He couldn't find it in himself to truly grasp the situation he was facing. He much preferred the alternative of it being a hidden gem of a book that he had simply forgotten about. But something piqued his curiosity. When he faced the stairs back down, he noticed that there was more. A third floor to the bookshop waiting for him. While he was sure that he was running less time than he would have been comfortable with, curiosity got the better of him. Nothing wrong with taking another peek, right? Plus, if he found an electrical outlet, he could tell his boss that he'd be late because of traffic or whatever. Marching up the stairs, Daniel was met with a similar sight as downstairs. Instead of first edition books, however, there were a multitude of books that had been recently printed. Anything that he could name, Daniel could see it on the shelf, although the fascination of the room dimmed a bit as he realized that the next floors were just going to be more of the same. And it wasn't as if the floor were limitless. That'd be ridiculous. Simply ridiculous. While he was here, he had a section of Agatha Christie that was close to the stairs. All of them seemed to be recent prints, ranging from her novels to her short story collections. He had his eye on Miss Maple's story, and went to grab it. But when his fingers pushed onto it, the book fell on its back. The book fell to the back. The shelf was directly pressed against the wall, and it shouldn't have slid past so easily, but it did, almost by instinct. Daniel picked up the books that were next to it. It was hard to see what was past the books, so Daniel opted to move the shelf entirely. Grabbing it from the left and pulling it away from the wall, he was shocked to find that there wasn't a wall. The shelf was hiding a bigger room with more books. There wasn't much light in the bigger part of the room. The only thing that gave light was another fan light in the ceiling. But for whatever ceiling there was in that room, it was a lot higher than Daniel expected. Bring of Fire started to feel warm on his stomach. It was a warning sign for Daniel, but he didn't pay much attention. Not at first, at least. Not until it got hot enough to burn him. When he felt the book sting in his hand, he felt broken out of a trance. An instinct of flight kicked in, and Daniel found himself running upstairs in a hurry. He could barely keep focus on where he was going, and just kept running, up the stairs as fast as he could go, disregarding the rooms he was passing by. He only stopped when his legs gave way, forcing himself to crumble onto the floor. Looking around himself, he only saw more shelves filled with books, or something that looked like books. Grabbing the nearest one to his head in a bit of curiosity, he found out that it was merely a box. He didn't recognize the author or the title, but the blurb on the back clued him in on that the story belonged to the science fiction genre. To satiate the last bit of curiosity within him, he opened the box. There was nothing inside. It didn't quite matter, however. As soon as Daniel opened the box, he held onto his head in pain. It was as if his brain was forced to daydream while he was still in the present. Visions of spacecraft, extraterrestrial diseases, and space zombies covered his eyes like see-through wallpaper. He wasn't seeing these things. He was remembering these things. He tried to cover his face with his hands, but only one of them came through. The other one ceased to exist. He remembered having it amputated to stop the virus from spreading. Did he remember that? He didn't know anymore. Daniel stumbled upon his position and ended up crashing through another bookshelf. He was now inside the dark room. Normal books were back again, but now that he was inside, he could see how far it stretched. Endless spotlights with endless shelves, as far as his covered eyes allowed him to see. He moved forward, wanting to be anywhere else but where he was. All that his mind could hear were the screaming of his team as they were being ejected into deep space, the hissing sound of a monster, just as it was about to strike, when he heard the roar of a zombie. He broke into a sprint that only got him to trip over a row of books that had been left on the floor. Looking back behind him, there were a lot of rows of books on the floor. They spanned all across the floor like snakes. They moved more like worms, though. Daniel could barely utter a cry when he suddenly began to sweat. He was starting to see better now. The room was getting good lighting now, a nice orange glow. Daniel looked behind him to see where the light was coming from. It was a man on fire. He was wearing a police trooper uniform, his hair being a blazing shade of ginger. He wore sunglasses and a fake smile with fake teeth, which was paid for with bad money. He only kept walking towards Daniel at an uneven pace. He was wailing something. It was for someone that wasn't Daniel.
Mama, I'm burning up. Help me, Mama. Your boy is burning up.
Daniel did his best to crawl away from what he was seeing. He saw the rows of books in front of him, spreading a fire that began to surround him. He heard screams in those pages. They were in pain. He didn't know if crawling was going to help anymore. The visions of space were starting to suffocate him now. He could only see the empty expanse of nothing, with a layer of smoke clouding everything. He couldn't breathe anymore, but he could feel it. He could feel the fire latching onto his shoes. The fabric burns on his toes. It spreads faster than he could process. He's completely captured. His organs are cooking. His nostrils are filled with smoke and the flavor of burnt bacon. He can hear his eyes sizzle. He holds his arm up to his face and starts bludgeoning himself. He wants to end this quickly. He doesn't want to keep dying for a second longer. He has to die now. He'll pass any second now, any minute now. The employee on the ground floor gets a phone call from his supervisor. He slips his newspaper down to the side and answers the call, not expecting much. He's pleasantly surprised that a new applicant has been accepted for his position. With another cashier in place, the two of them can swap shifts. He will have to give training to the new attendee, as his disabilities will mean that he won't get used to the job instantly. He's excited for it nonetheless. It'll mean he'll finally get a chance to move his legs once in a while. Not outside, of course, but inside. And hey, he'll have more to read than that stupid newspaper. It can get tiring reading the same thing for 15 years. It's nothing much, to be honest, just a simple job, since police work was too hard for me. If I could help it, I would have loved to be a detective, but I get a bit too sickly at times. In any case, it's something that keeps me busy and fed. Can't complain with that. Can definitely complain about where I'm stationed though, because just a mile or two from our station is Disneyland. And you'll be very much surprised to hear how often we get phone calls about an accident that needs our help. It's not even usually just small fires we need to take care of. We also have to play second fiddle to ambulances when they get too busy to help everyone. And before you ask, yes, we do get occasionally asked to help a cat out of a tree every so often. It definitely keeps us limber and active, but you eventually get sick of the free trips to the happiest place on earth, especially when that magic is lost for good. That's what I want to talk about here. A call we got from Disneyland that I've never been able to forget. Hard to really pinpoint where to properly start, but, well, these things tend to start from the beginning, right? It was me and some work buddies of mine playing a game of cards when we get a ring from the chief that Disneyland is in dire need of our services again. We shoved our cards onto the table and stretched our muscles before rushing over to the truck and setting it off. The usual smell Disneyland had reminded me of a full-capacity gym locker. Just sweat and body odor. Usually had to pinch my nose to keep myself from gagging on the job. When we got there, it was just about the same. But judging from the large crowd surrounding the entrance, this wasn't going to be routine. Hell, as we got closer, the all too familiar smell of charcoal started to fill the air. This wasn't a case of a simple garbage bin fire, or a kid who went into heat stroke. We had a real fire going, and that had to be stopped. The employees at the front gate brought us in past the crowd and filled us in on what was going on. Apparently, some sick kid decided to light some fireworks near a Fantasyland building, which went just about as expected. The kid already got dragged out by a good Samaritan, but he said he heard some people screaming around the general area and wasn't sure if they got out. So we had two things we needed to do: put out the fire and look for anyone who needs saving. We split off into pairs, one of us each carrying a hose and the other carrying a fire axe. I was chosen for the axe, my buddy Todd for the hose. We ran past the castle gate and into the courtyard, and what greeted us was a vision straight out of a nightmare. All the buildings were burning to cinders. The rides were falling apart and crashing down onto the ground in an inferno. We had our work cut out for us, and we needed to work fast. I directed Todd to places where the fire was the strongest, and he helped me point out any voices he heard within the fires. If there was one thing Todd was great at, it was a talent for picking apart sounds and focusing on important ones. We were at a steady pace, bringing down the fires and helping out some folks who were trapped. But then came the worst. Right by the edge of Fantasyland was a simple building, not a major attraction, just something for kids to fulfill a dream of. Meet Mickey Mouse. That was one of the buildings on fire, and Todd said that he heard someone in there. So while Todd had to doze the flames out, on the offset, I needed to go inside and find whoever it was that was inside there. The fire axe came in handy, great for chopping down bits of debris indoors that needed opening. To this day, there's still a part of me that wish I gave up at the auditorium part of the building. When I saw burnt up footage of old Mickey Mouse cartoons playing through a projector onto the wall, I should have trusted my gut and ran back out. Yet I didn't. By God, I didn't. Someone so needed saving. Hell, at this point, I could hear that someone too. Someone who needed saving was going to get my help. So I jumped over the metal gates and headed towards the back. The screams of agony were coming from the Mickey Mouse room. Had to have been an employee. Someone who needed help. I rushed over to the door and chopped down the door. And there was Mickey Mouse. His legs were trapped under a pile of debris. Bits of burning wood were slipping onto his back and mask. It sinked past the clothing and onto the skin itself. The mask in particular looked sunken, as the fire burnt away parts of the mask to reveal a bright red scalp that was being torched underneath. Must have been burning like a sauna in the costume. I can still remember. It looked like steam was coming off of him. I was just frozen in shock for what felt like an eternity at the sight. I've seen people get hurt and die before, but not here. Not at the happiest place in the world. I snapped myself back into place, and my ears focused on the screams the guy was making, reminding me of a banshee. I knelt down beside him and judged what would be the best course of action. His legs were pinned under the debris, but his arms were still free. I could pull him out of there and get him to safety. Get Todd to bring him back to the fire truck. I held onto his arms and started to pull. This guy was going to live. He'd have to get extensive skin graft surgery, but he was going to be okay. He started screaming again. He'll have to live the rest of his life as a disabled man, but at least he gets the chance to live. He screeches in pain. I wasn't going to stop until I could assure this man's safety. He begs me to let go. I couldn't let go. He sobs into the mask. I wasn't letting go. He slides out of the debris, and he leaves his legs behind. I stare at where his legs were. They had been punctured by some broken shrapnel in his thighs. The way that held those pieces of shrapnel in place as I pulled him out. I was killing him, and I didn't even know it. I couldn't let myself fall there, so I stumbled out of the room and ran outside. Told Todd that the fire got too great inside and that I couldn't save him. He just gave me a pat on the back and told me he understood. About an hour and a half later, we got back up, and an hour later, we stopped the fires. Only noted casualty was the Mickey Mouse employee who died in the building. Reportedly died of blood loss, all because of me. It's been a few years since that happened, and I've not gotten over it since. I can cloud it to the back of my mind when I'm at home and when I'm doing my job anywhere else but Disneyland. But when I'm at the happiest place in the world, I can't help myself from feeling guilty. Guilty for being responsible for the death of that man. Hell, at times I start hallucinating. Might be from the heat or guilt. But whenever I take a small walk in that park, I feel like I'm being watched. I hear thudding sounds when I'm alone, at times in the park. And when I'm looking at nothing in particular, I spot something in the dark alleyways. Pinprick eyes. They're always close to the floor. And they only look at me. Humanity was due to break a new world record anyways. Mankind's progress for becoming greater than we were the day before has become stilted. But eventually one person from two different types of people will sit down and decide to change history. Those two types are the men who wish to be a pioneer and the men who wish to make money. While I like to think myself as the former, the people at Virgin Galactic who've funded this project fit squarely into the second type. We're mere minutes away from reaching what we have to do, the highest jump anyone will ever have done. Earlier attempts were done through usage of weather balloons, from my understanding, while the great men that have come before me have risked their lives in achieving what was previously thought impossible. It is time for them to be surpassed. It feels cramped inside this spaceplane. My arms and legs are bundled together in silver-lined restraints, while the entire interior of the plane being coated in a dark blue. A small monitor displayed the time and the stages the plane is going through. It is currently 3:09 p.m., and we are nearing the end of the takeoff stage. White Knight 2 is controlling the ascent of the plane, so there's only a quiet hum from above. Everything else is silent. I remind myself why I'm doing this. While human progress has stilted, technology is continuing to thrive. The men who organized this project understood this notion. The general idea for it came when their passion project, the Spaceship Two, went from a thing of novelty and fantasy into a legitimate and affordable way of travel. As soon as they perfected the formula, they realized they could best the records set by Joe Kittiger, Felix Baumgartner, and Alan Eustace. Not by a few thousand meters as well. They could have a man jumping from a height of 300,000 feet, more than double the current world record. I was chosen to be the man to jump, as my qualifications and training proved to be highly satisfactory. I do not aim to disappoint. The record will rely on the plane reaching the highest altitude, at the point where the plane reaches a state of microgravity, a state of weightlessness. Once reached, I will exit the plane as soon as possible and dive down to Earth. As of now, the plane is currently being piloted towards space. The plane has been separated from White Knight 2, and the rocket engine has just been activated. It is now 3:13 p.m. I am sitting as close as possible to the door I have to jump through. It takes all my strength to not look outside the window. I don't want to spoil the surprise. The next stage is being reached with the climb. The plane flies upwards at a near perfectly straight line. It is hard to tell if I'm sitting down anymore. I can only see the ceiling as of now. The helmet restricts my vision in parts. I feel myself starting to sweat in this suit. It was made to withstand intense temperatures, in the event of an unexpectedly high re-entry speed, and for the general coldness of space. A drawback has come from it retaining heat on the inside. It's like a sauna inside the suit. Hopefully, I'll keep my head clear when I have to leave. Almost there. I can hear a loud hum from the back. The last of the rocket engine is being used. Microgravity should start any second now. I run my hand through my back to be sure my parachute is still there. It is. I fall near the clouds. I will release the parachute. Once I'm down there, I'll be remembered as a new pioneer for the ages. This event will be bigger than my life. It will be bigger than anything. I feel my legs jitter in place against the floor, and then they stop. They can't jitter against the floor when they're not on it anymore. We've reached the maximum altitude. I unbuckle my restraints and move to the door. I give a thumbs up to whoever's piloting and open the door. I look down at the world in front of me. It doesn't look as big as I thought it would up here. I can barely see the land down there. It's a mixture of clouds over a sea of blue, like a ragged blanket stretched over a bed. It gives me a pause. I feel nauseous. It starts to set in how insane this is, but I refuse to falter. I'm making history. I ran my head through my back once again. My parachute is still there. There's no more time to wait. I walk before I tell myself to do so, and then I fall. I can't feel anything. There's no wind to guide me like Earth normally would. The fall doesn't feel right. I have to pay attention to everything else. If there is something I can currently know, it is that I'm currently starting to fall faster. I look around my surroundings, and I see pitch black. And I'm looking down, I see the Earth grow bigger. I look upwards and try to see if I can see the space plane I jumped out of. I don't think it's there anymore. Or at least, if it is. Or at least, if it did. It's blended in with the darkness. With nothing. I made a mistake in looking up. I moved my arms by mistake. There's a slight spin to my descent. This is dangerous now. I try to counteract the spin by adjusting my other limbs. It doesn't help with matters. I can't hear or see anything, but I feel it everywhere. My heart is spinning. It feels like my blood is forced to be stationary. I have to keep trying to center myself. Can't panic here. Anywhere but here. At some point, I exit the mesosphere, and approach the stratosphere. The spin is starting to stop, but only just. But now, I just fall quicker. Feels like the worst roller coaster in the world. I'm sick to my stomach. I have to hold it in. I look around my surroundings. Around me is pure blackness of space. Below me is Earth, growing even larger. Above me is a blue fire. Spaceship 2 is on fire, and rapidly descending. I don't understand. There weren't any malfunctions during any stage of this. There were no reports of meteorites approaching at this time of day either. Any rational explanation I could give for why this is happening is wrong. I'm still falling to Earth. I keep my eyes to the nothingness of space. But there's something there with me. I don't know what it is. It appears to be a dark blue circle of some kind. It's very far away from me, but it has to be bigger than me. So much bigger. I can't tell if it's falling with me. I don't think it moves. And then it does. It rushes down to my planet. It blends in with the world below. It's beginning to turn gray now. The land beneath me is visible. I'll be approaching the clouds soon, but I don't want to be down there anymore. That thing might have been responsible for downing the plane I was just on. It could come for me next. I can just barely feel an intense heat while the plane falls faster than I can. It barely misses me as it shoots straight to the ground. I can just barely see a hole in the front of the cockpit before it's gone. It was blasted open. I can't think anymore. I can only fall. Reaching the troposphere now. The clouds are vastly approaching. I look off in the distance, and something concerns me again. There's more blue circles. They're all over the sky. They're covering the world. What happens if I'm too slow and I land on one of them? What happens if I make it? I'm past the clouds now. I'm still falling, but I still haven't pulled my parachute. I'm falling past the circles. There's a fire down there below me. There's a fire everywhere. This is the world now. Why did this happen while I was gone? I'm still falling. The ground is getting closer. I don't know what to do. If I pull the parachute, how long can I live for? Would there be any to save me? The fire would probably take me. I'd die a slow death if I pull my parachute. Maybe I don't need to die that way. I can just let this happen. No need to suffer. I will fall until I stop. I'm the last pioneer. The last human being to have changed the course of history. It ends with me. It ends with... My name is Gonzalo Guzman Camaño, and I'm going to tell you about something horrible that happened to me 2 weeks ago. I couldn't hold this back for any longer, so I decided to write this so I can remain sane, and know for sure that what happened to me was real. It all began one night when my friend suddenly came to my house. His face was pale, and his body trembled non-stop. In his right hand, he was holding a blue USB, which he slowly drew close to my face. "Take it," he whispered. I obeyed with fear and put the USB in my pocket. Immediately, my friend covered his face with both his hands and cried silently. His sobbing got louder until it turned into screams of agony. I got scared, so I tried to ask him what happened. He suffered on the floor for a few seconds, and then he stopped breathing. I screamed for help until my mom showed up. What happened next, I'd rather not remember. The day of the funeral was one of the most disturbing days I have ever lived. Seeing my friend's entire family crying for him destroyed me on the inside. The autopsy stated that his cause of death was epilepsy, but they never asked me about what happened. I never found out why. When I got home, I locked myself in my bedroom and started sobbing, remembering the moment he died, time and time again. Then I remembered. The USB. Quickly, I looked in the basket with dirty clothes and checked the pockets of the pants that I used that day, and so I found the USB. At first, I hesitated plugging that thing into the computer, and to this day, I regret having done so. I was so scared, but I decided to check what was inside that thing. I turned on the PC, and as soon as it booted up, I plugged in the USB. A window popped up, which said the USB had a file inside. It was a document written in a language I still can't recognize. Not thinking about it, I opened up the document, and inside, it had a file named Sonic, the Hedgehog.exe. I noticed the name was badly written, but I couldn't process it in my head. I double-clicked the file, and an error message appeared. I can't remember what it said, just something along the lines of the file not existing. I felt relieved for a moment, and then I remembered the name was wrong. And several times, I had gotten a file to work by changing its name, so I added the missing E in Hedgehog. The file allowed me to correct its name, turning into sonicthehedgehog.exe. That's when I remembered that my dead friend liked Sonic. It was scary to accept such things, but I was calm at the fact that it was about the friendly blue character. I double-clicked the new file, and the screen turned black. A few seconds later, in the lower part of the screen, a text saying, "Loading," appeared, with an ellipsis that appeared and disappeared frequently.
It was a fucking game?
I shouted. I didn't know how to feel about that. I waited until the game was fully loaded, and the screen changed to an 8-bit background with a colorful logo of Sonic the Hedgehog, moving his finger just like the old games along the obvious music. For a moment, I thought that the USB had nothing to do with my friend's death, until I saw the small letters that were supposed to write Sega's name and all the other credits, which were all written in the same strange language as the document. Shivers went down my spine, and I decided to press enter. That's when the name of the original level popped up, with the same music, and the level itself started. I'd move with the arrow keys and jump with the spacebar. I held the right button, and Sonic seemed to run normally. The strange part started when I crashed into an enemy. In the real game, crashing just made rings come out of Sonic's body as a way to damage, but that didn't happen here. Instead of rings, some weird objects appeared, which looked like red squares. I thought it was a simple glitch in my optimistic mind, but deep down, I knew that meant no good. I kept moving until I finished the level. Instead of them mentioning the next zone, another message in the weird language popped up. This time, the background was normal. It had this blood-red color, slowly moving. I was scared for real, and so I pressed escape, but the game didn't close. So I tried using Ctrl Alt and Delete, which didn't work either. I had started to lose my mind, as the screen distorted violently. A light flashed quickly, which paralyzed me. I couldn't move nor close my eyes. All I could do was look at the horrible things that appeared on the screen. I began hearing female screams, excessively disturbing, while in the first layer, I could see Sonic's face shedding tears of blood, with the text writing, "R.I.P." It appeared everywhere. The screams didn't stop. In fact, they had gotten louder, to the point where I started crying without moving. My eyes simply dropped tears. Then I began trembling.
I'll have the same fate as him,
I thought with fear. The screen turned black, and the screaming had ceased. I was struggling to move, but it was all in vain. And from the black screen, a big 10, written in red, appeared. Then it turned into a 9, 8, 7.
I have to get out of here,
I thought, still unable to move. 6, 5. With my best effort, I was able to move my finger, then my head, then my arms, and finally my whole body. The countdown hit 2 when I jumped to the floor to cover my head, as if there was a shooting. I heard a horrible woman scream, similar to those that appeared in Screamers, but this one was scarier, and to top it all off, it was longer. Quickly, I got to plug the computer off. I took the USB and stomped it to shreds. The nightmare had ended. Still, I couldn't stop trembling. I cleaned the tears from my eyes and left the computer room. I haven't told this to anyone until now, so maybe I should forget it. Sometimes I feel like I shouldn't put my life in danger over a simple curiosity. It's not worth it. But if there's something I'm sure about, it's that whatever happened when the countdown ended, I don't ever want to know. It was a steep Tuesday night winter, what many could regard as a time of comfort for family and bonding. I didn't get any of that any year. I've lived on my own for a couple of years now as an antisocial worm. I was preparing myself for another restless night when I had noticed the windowsill was open. I found this odd because, obviously, I didn't recall opening it, though it could have been my imagination. I firmly shut the panel and continued my routine of getting into my pajamas. The closet felt emptier today, not to mention it was a mess. Snugly, I fit myself and get into bed to turn on the TV, despite the odd occurrences. It was roughly 1 a.m, and I didn't feel a wink tired, just groggy and sick. I shifted through channel after channel, tapping at the remote until the batteries unfortunately died. Though I really didn't want to. I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen so I could replace them, and what the fuck? The kitchen was a mess. Was someone here? How? I locked my front door. I was paranoid now as I began organizing everything, feeling watched. I kept the kitchen knife close to my person while finishing up. A jolt running down from my spine as clattering pots sounded from the pantry. Who the fuck is there? I called to the closed door, with a blade brandished, slowly reaching for the knob before the door flung open. Inside, I found a girl. She looked no older than 10, with skin as dark as the night, and unnaturally gray blue hair that somehow had an enchanting feeling. That somehow had an enchanting teal glow to it. She had her face stuck to a pot, and I grabbed the handle to pop it off. My eyes went wider at the abyss that was the girl's face. Nothing but 2 large blue eyes and glowing lips. She tilted her head at me, focusing on my being rather than the knife I practically held in her face. I lowered my arm and rubbed my head. Kid, how the hell did you get in here? Where's your parents? She could have been my neighbor's daughter, but even then, there's no way she'd be able to get into my house. I was met with silence as the girl walked past me and sat at the couch while playing with the remote. Hey, leave that alone. I sat beside her and snatched it away, but to my dismay, she already opened the back and had the batteries in her mouth. I tried to speak, but she swallowed them whole, leaving me clueless as to what the hell I was talking to. Was this even a child? Or some freaky alien? She sure felt otherworldly. My hand gently ran through the hair of the girl. It felt like a cold vacuum. Like space, if you would. I rode my head and gathered myself. Getting up to the kitchen, I snagged a bag of chips and tossed them to the girl while I tried getting a hold of the police. And didn't want to be seen as some kidnapper. Yes, hello? I'd like to make a report. I began with the operator, watching the little girl gnaw at the bag to try and open it. Walking over, I tore the top of the bag and continued. Yeah, there's a lost child in my apartment. No clue how she got here, but I hope you guys could come by and help. I was delighted as the operator confirmed they'd sent someone over in the morning. Just had to last the night. I sat back beside the girl, who was stuffing her face with no manner after sucking the chips up like a damned vacuum. It was endearing, in a freaky way. The girl must have been starving, with how fast she dug in and finished the family-sized bag. Alright, kid. Come on. I gently grasped her hips and sat her in my lap as I turned on the living room TV. Then I continued on rather tame. And when my eyes got too heavy, I fell asleep while holding the child close. Hours pass, and I wake up in a cold sweat and a splitting headache, clutching my head with a groan. I have no clue if something I drank that day had alcohol or what, but it hurt. Unfortunately, I woke up the kid, but she didn't cry or even yelp. She just smiled up at me, curiously. It was, yet again, endearing. It filled me with reassurance, and so I got up lightly from the couch with her following. I prepared breakfast until a knock sickly slammed my door, making the kid, no, Kieta is what I think I'll call her, it sent her hiding. So I went to check it out, and there was the police here about the child report I made. I told them that I must have been drunk, and that I apologized for wasting their time with an issue that didn't exist. As soon as they left, I called Kieta out from her hiding spot and gave her a tight hug. They were going to take her away, and I didn't want that anymore. She gave me a joy that I've lacked for years. As soon as breakfast was finished up, I took her to the living room and booted on my Xbox One. With controller in hand, I asked her if she wanted to play any games, though I was sadly met with silence. That was okay. Her smile told me everything I needed to know. So we played Sonic Racing for a few, maybe 4 hours. She was laughably bad, but it was cute watching her try her best, you know? Once the gaming session was over, I treated her to some lunch by using Uber Eats to send some McDonald's for us. When the food arrived, I brought it in and found Kieta had already planted herself in a chair. To my surprise, she didn't gobble any of the food down. She watched me eat with content, Cheshire grin. I have to admit, by now I already felt myself getting tired. I'm never usually this sleepy in the afternoon, but I couldn't fight it. I told Kieta that she could watch the TV and join me when she was ready. Going right up to bed and clocking out for a good couple hours. I woke up in a sweat again. Kieta was sitting on my lap, staring at me. Was she watching me sleep? You need something, hon? Silence, as always. It gets quite annoying, but I suck it up and try going back to sleep, cuddling her in my arms. This process goes on for days, no weeks. I feed her. We play games, I sleep. I wake up feeling like shit, and there she is, watching me like a guardian angel or a guard dog. I had to see a doctor to see if he knew what was up, but all I learned is I'm not brushing enough. Gee, thanks. I sat down with Kieta on a Tuesday evening, fighting any sleepiness I had, so I could talk to her. I don't feel well, hon. It feels like my head is always aching, like I'm hearing things, and I don't think I can keep taking care of you in this state. Please, I need you to tell me if you'll be okay if I arrange a babysitter for you. She didn't speak a peep, just nodding in an uneasy pace. I had to go with it, but I had skepticism, and got up. She took the remote and watched the TV. I set up a camera in my room to see if I could get down to the bottom of this and figure out why my sleep was so horrible every fucking night for the past 2 months. Once it was all adjusted, I rested in my bed and got as comfy as I could. My eyes slowly sank and I drifted off for the night. When I awoke, I was shocked. Kieta wasn't on me like usual. I got up and quickly scurried out of bed. Kieta. I called as I made my way to the living room. She wasn't there either, not in the kitchen nor bathroom. I felt an immense dread like none before. Did she get kidnapped? Did she wander out of the house? Either way, I dashed for the phone to file a missing person report. Hours passed, and the sun rested across the horizon. The clouds had never felt so gray to me. I sat in my bed with the phone close by for any call of the cops. When it caught my attention, the camera I set up that night, I had to know where she went. I snatched the metal trinket and rewound through, searching for answers. Something finally caught my attention. Something that made my blood run cold. That was Kieta sitting over me last night, but something about her face was almost eerie, Her hair was much longer and looked like it was fucking floating. I leaned in as the girl I once trusted showed its face to the screen. It was horrific. It was horrific as it was beautiful. Two massive eyes that reflected the night sky, and a gaping blue mouth devoid of teeth. Just a mystical void. She was sucking something out of me. My soul? No, it wasn't that. It was a light pink bubble that just looking at it gave me a sense of comfort. Like a dream. She devoured the bubble. She faced the camera and turned tail, opening the window. In the 2 months I had known her, she muttered a phrase that won't leave my mind. The last thing it ever said as it leaped from the windowsill into the night. "Good night, Mr. Prince." Hey, have you ever heard of spotter.mp4? Supposedly, it's a video that could appear to anyone on any video sharing site. You can recognize it by the title. A thumbnail containing two eyes on a completely black background, and the lack of an author listed anywhere. The video itself contains about 30 seconds of just eyes from the thumbnail, staring at the screen, backed by the audio of heavy breathing, occasional swallowing, and, near the end, what can only be assumed to be someone just loudly licking their lips. At least, this is how people who claim to have seen the video described it prior to their deaths. Because anyone who views spotter.mp4 will spontaneously die within hours of unknown causes. Some people who haven't seen the video themselves, but say that they knew someone who did, have told stories of finding the corpse of the viewer in their home, and then later learning that it was entirely drained of blood and missing several vital organs, all seeming to have mysteriously vanished from their body. Another property the video is said to have is that once it appears, it won't leave you alone. You can ignore it, remove it from your recommendations, switch accounts, and even use a different device, but it will always show up again sooner or later. It's clever too. It can disappear for months at a time, only to reappear just as you forgot about it, and guess the position where it's most likely for you to accidentally click on it based on your mouse movement. If evaded for too long, it'll even go as far as to disguise itself as other videos, leaving nothing but its eyes to tip you off. It's as if it has a mind of its own and desperately wants to be seen. Of course, this is all just rumors. Spotter.mp4 has never been proven to truly exist, and even if it did, it's unlikely that you would ever come across it in your lifetime. Be warned, however, just because you haven't seen spotter.mp4, that doesn't mean it hasn't spotted you. The cleaner. There's a little secret inside County View Hospital. You learn about it as part of training day. You get gathered into separate groups in an in-depth tour of the department your job is focused in. You're then shown a brief tour for the rest of the hospital. Given a slight mention then, you'll get used to the rest of the place the more you work here. And then, when you're taken to the morgue, that's when you'll be shown the secret. We don't house any monsters here, in case you're wondering. No ghouls or beasts that eat any corpses or workers that come their way down. I can promise you that. But it is a dangerous thing. There's a good reason that, even if you won't work in the morgue, you're given an in-depth explanation about it. The thing in question is an experimental machine that's designed to emulsify corpses. The machine achieves this with an acid shower, melting the flesh and organs away into liquid while the bones are left intact. There's no official name for the thing, but I like to call it the cleaner, since at the end, it gives the skeleton a bleach white look to it. The cleaner looks like an iron coffin with some glass on its left and right side, to see how the emulsifying is coming along. Underneath the coffin is some polyethylene tubes that lead down into a large bucket for the mixture of liquids, which tends to come out as blackened sludge to be thrown out. It sits inside the middle of the morgue, its sleek and dark gray look contrasting with the muddied whites of the walls, floors, and ceiling. To ensure that any new trainees are careful with the machine, we are told a story about Stefan. Stefan was a morgue's assistant, a young man who just got on the job recently as we did. He was a smart and charming man, albeit one who was clumsy and forgetful. He did his best to make up for the flaws by following the routine related to the machine as closely as he possibly could. It was a night shift job, and it all began when examination of the body had ended and when permission had been granted by the relatives of the deceased. He'd carted the body inside the coffin and let it rest inside. He'd closed the many doors on the top and bottom sides of the coffin. Then he'd push a red button on the bottom side of the coffin and let it work its magic. While he melted the body, he'd prepare himself by dressing up in a protective suit, complete with a gas mask and gloves. Once the machine was finished, he'd wheel the skeleton out from the coffin and bring it to one of the lockers. For the bucket, he'd carry it towards a specially made waste container before taking that to the waste disposal. It wouldn't take a genius to figure out that on one of these days something went wrong. In actuality, a few things went wrong. Most of them were beyond Stefan's control, aside from some key mistakes. The first mistake was that the body was to be melted. For a lack of a better way of putting this, it was a fat man's corpse. Its weight exceeded what was generally recommended for the machine. Yet the hospital had already signed off on the body being emulsified. To be on the safe side, Stefan opted to use a larger bucket to carry all the mixture at once, for when it needed to be moved. The second mistake was entirely on Stefan and his charms. As he had pushed the button and gotten the cleaner to work, he received a call from a girlfriend of his. She was someone he had met at the hospital. The one in charge of the tour says she was just leaving work and wanted to see how he was doing. He was in the middle of getting his protective gear on when the call came, and Stefan couldn't help himself in getting distracted. When he finished the call, the machine had finished its duty. The third mistake he made was zipping up his suit and heading towards the machine without the gas mask or gloves. He felt rushed. He didn't want to fall behind schedule and risk getting reprimanded. He carefully brought the skeleton to its locker and then went up to pick up the bucket. The first mistake that was made was starting to become realized in the mixture of liquid flesh and acid. It was a lot heavier than Stefan realized. It wasn't impossible to lift. It only took more effort than Stefan used. Since it was a night shift job, everyone else had gone home for the night. Not wanting to leave the job undone, he got to work carrying the bucket to the waste disposal container. The penultimate mistake was not noticing the bucket had overflowed. Some of the mixture had leaked onto the floor, holding the bucket up on its chest. Stefan couldn't see the mess on the floor, and he walked directly on top of it. With a quick slip onto his back, the mixture splashed on top of him. The last mistake was not even his fault, but the hospital's. The protective suit could only protect him from low concentrations of acid. Even with the massive dilution of liquid flesh, it wasn't enough to protect Stefan. He wasn't found until hours later, when one of the janitors went to do his work there. The smell was already overpowering before the door was even opened. The janitor had to hold up a cloth to his mouth before he could go inside. Once the door was opened, he found Stefan lying on the floor. He had been trying to get to the sink, resting on his stomach with one of his arms outstretched. A meter or so from the sink, a river of pink and red blood followed him, with bits and pieces of internal organs mixed in. His back was dotted with large holes that only showed Stefan's skeleton, a thick and viscous sludge on the floor beneath him. When his body was turned over, his face was unrecognizable. A half-melted eyeball, his teeth and hair were the only clues that showed who he was. What was left of his face was turning into a sort of brownish sludge, mixed in with some dark reds and blacks. A light shade of pink came through in the middle of it all. His brain matter leaking through what remained of his nose. It took 2 weeks for the smell to eventually pass. Months for both janitors and Stefan's girlfriends to start making progress on the road to mental recovery, all because of some little mistakes that piled up into the death of an innocent man. Moral of the story? Don't fuck with the cleaner and it won't fuck with you. It's our last gig on the road before we need to make our next album. Right now, we're all backstage. Pretty highbrow place. Certainly a step above other places, since we're not packed tight together like pickles in a jar. Smells better too. I've been sitting down on the couch, strumming some chords on the first guitar I bought for this band. John's saying I need to relax myself. Before we start, something about how my leg is shaking. Fucker doesn't know how to direct his hands to do anything but play bass. He certainly doesn't know shit about how I'm feeling. I'm fucking ecstatic. I haven't felt this amazing since our prime years, 20-something years back, and I still feel like a 25-year-old pipsqueak dipshit making it big. I don't give a fuck if it isn't the 80s anymore. Our crowd certainly doesn't. I can hear them past the curtain screaming our names, the sound of our collective fan base adoring us, and wanting to bang us hasn't changed a bit. I'm sure a good portion of them still want me too. Who the fuck wouldn't want me? I'm Neil Cashmere. Of course they want me. Never needed some stupid Botox surgery like old drummer boy Thomas, and I don't need makeup like that John. I'm 50% beautiful and 50% talent. I never needed anything else. No crutches for me. Show's going to start anytime soon, and I can't fucking wait. When they hear that I've still got the guitar and still got the fingers to use that bitch, I'm in the history books. I'm up there with the fucking greats and Valhalla, and tonight will prove that. Donnie's saying we're up. Fucker is the only one who recognizes me as the best guy here. Bastard deserves a high five. I feel like running out here. I could run an Olympic marathon right now. I'm so fucking pumped. I can take on the entire world, and they'd do nothing but lick my boots and praise me as the god I am. Just need to hit that simple state, and I'm fucking in. Been practicing getting into the flow state for a fair bit. Before this performance, about a week or so ago. So I've probably hit it before without thinking, but I could train myself into getting into it intentionally. I needed that. I'll get that. If these guys need to remember me, I'm going to give them a show they'll never forget. And if they're going to get that, I need to be running at full capacity. Pure focus on what needs to be done. Flowing like water. I can do this. First song's up. It's the hit that got us famous in the first place. Lily's Over There. Simple song, but blown out of proportion. Can't get into flow with this song. I've gotten sick of it. It's Far Away as our worst song. It never lets us do the shit we can actually do well. Plus, it means I've got to sit back in the background while Pretty Boy Thomas tries his hand at doing some groovy beats. Bastard. Just gonna play along until it's my time to shine. Tonight's going to be the night to remember, and it's not going to be because of Lily's Over There. It's all just going to be me. Song's finally done. Thank God. Still thinking on where I need to show off my greatness. Doing it so quickly at the second song, it's not going to be the time. I need to save that for somewhere near the end. Can't be right at the end though. That's Donnie's big solo. A powerhouse moment. That's all his, and not my place to ruin it. I mean, of course, I'll be able to overshadow it earlier in the gig, but I can't overshadow him when it's his time. He's the only guy here I respect. Thomas is a candy-ass sellout, and there's no moment that goes by where I don't want John to drown himself in his clean fucking water. God, he's doing it again. Probably swigging on a bottle of that shit like it's the tastiest thing in the world aside from his boyfriend's cum. Bastard still wants to taunt me about what everyone else did in the 80s. I did it the worst, but so did everyone else. Not clean Johnny though. Never clean Johnny. Oh yeah, flow state. Still need to decide when to hit that. We've already swept through a good chunk of the songs that I don't give a shit about. We're going to be hitting the real heavy hitters soon. The ones our actual fans care about. Not the pussy shit that the general populace listens to. This is for the fans of actual rock and roll. The people that give a shit about what people like us do. The world at large throws shit like this away so that some bullshit like Blink-182 or some other jackasses who just touch their instruments get all the attention. But not the people who actually give a shit about good music. They're still here, and they deserve good music. So let's see. Our next song. I'll do it. I'll get into flow state and treat these fuckers to something they've never seen before. Time to say Farewell Martian. And time to say hello to the song that's gonna make me a legend. Going Over. It was the best song on our sophomore album. And it's one of our few songs that lets me get a solo. Can't hit it just yet. Need to savor it. It comes near the end of this song, so I need to hold myself steady. Can't fucking wait. The whole world will know me. Donnie's pouring his heart out into the vocals as always. Thomas is mindlessly doing his part. John is absentmindedly acting like a cock. He doesn't know what's going to happen. It's just going to make things a lot more sweeter. Almost there. Almost there. It's here. Solo time. Just need to think about what's in front of me. This isn't about putting on a legendary performance. It's about performing. Just need to do what I do best. 50% talent has to grow into 100%. Fuck the beauty side. This is what I have to be known for. Fuck the past, and fuck the drugs. This is who I am. My hands are going off by themselves. They know how to play better than any prodigy. Muscle memory kicks in. I'm playing these strings like a man possessed. Everything becomes a blur. I'm nowhere but here and now. It's all coming at once, and it feels natural. The noise of the crowd screaming, it's starting to blend in, but I just have to block it out. I'm nowhere else but here. Keep them goddamn hands moving. Let those techniques come quickly to keep things fresh. I'm hitting the jackpot. This is it. There's no other time but now. No other time but... John, what the fuck does he think he's doing? Stop grabbing my goddamn shoulder. My solo's still going on. If it extends the performance, then roll with it. Don't waste my time. He's still holding my shoulder. You ain't stopping me for shit. You've had your turn. Let a real adult show you how it's done. Shit. He's throwing me off my rhythm. I'm losing the solo. Losing flow. Need to stay like water. I push him aside from me and keep playing. Managed to do it. On rhythm too. The crowd loves that. Back to flow. Nowhere else but here. He's trying to grab my guitar. That cocksucker. This is my fucking moment, and he's ruining it. The moment's going to pass. Almost out of flow. Need to stop him. Gotta make him learn his place. He wants the guitar. He's gonna fucking get it. Hold onto the neck of the guitar and swing at his head like an axe. His teeth fly off into the stage. Think one of them got lodged into the guitar. His mouth is dripping blood all over the stage. He looks at me wide-eyed. He's never been hit before. It's the best I've ever seen him. Need more out of him. I keep a hold of the guitar and swing it at him again, hitting him in the neck. He drops to the floor in a daze. Need more. Nowhere else but here. I flip him to the side so that I can see. I flip him to the side so that I can keep seeing that look on his face. I hold my weapon over him and slam it down onto him. And I keep going. Hands are going off by themselves. Every time I slam it down, blood splatters off into the front row. They're still there. They're either transfixed or they can't leave. Either or doesn't matter. I keep slamming. His bones are breaking through the skin. His jaw's looking like mush. His tongue hangs out loose, out of his mouth. He keeps looking at me. I see those eyes shimmer. He still knows how to piss me off. One more slam and he's not looking at me anymore. Crush his fucking eyes like grapes. Donnie's trying to drag me off while Thomas is barfing up his breakfast onto his drum set. Can't stop me. No use trying to stop the flow. I'm like fucking water. Can't stop me. Can't stop me. Can't stop. I'm no longer on stage. I'm backstage. My hands are kept tied behind my back, and they've got a gag over my mouth. Probably worried I'll bite off someone's face. Not needed. I ain't killing anyone else here. I'd have to be some weird psychopath to try that. Fuck that. John was enough. That solo was enough. I think I'm finally in. The legends must be smiling at me. Best damn solo I've ever played. Would have been better without the interruption, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. I can just about see John being carried away on a stretcher, still dripping blood everywhere. The cover isn't enough. Little parts of his scalp and cheek are sliding out. Hope you enjoyed the makeover, cunt. You'll be forgotten in a couple of years, guaranteed. And I'll still be known. Still going to be a legend, even when I'm rotting in prison. Die-hard fans will excuse me. I'm the fucking king. I'm Neil Kashmir. Best guitar player in the fucking world.